The frontier town of Red Creek had seen storms, raids, and men who carried more stories than scars. But nothing ever shook the townsfolk like the arrival of the wounded Apache warrior known as Iron Canyon. His name traveled before him like distant thunder. Some called him a living legend, a man shaped by the mountains and the burning desert wind. Others whispered that his strength was too much for any person to face. And when he was carried into the old mission-turned clinic, even the bravest nurses stepped back, unsure if they could tend to a man whose presence alone felt like a challenge. Iron Canyon had been found near the riverbank after a fierce encounter between rival groups that had been fighting over grazing land. The cowboy who found him said the warrior refused help and tried to walk despite the heavy wound across his side. No one understood how he survived that long. No woman in town had ever treated an Apache warrior before, and none had been prepared to handle someone with such fierce pride and raw power. Every nurse who approached him felt the same pull between fear and duty. They tried, but Iron Canyon would not let their hands near him. His eyes held old battles, and his silence warned them not to come close. The town doctor, an aging man named Alder Ridge, knew he needed someone brave enough to look past the warrior's reputation. But every woman who stepped forward left within minutes, shaken by his refusal or intimidated by his strength. They said his presence was too strong, his energy too heavy, and his silence impossible to work with. Some believed he would rise and walk out before allowing anyone to care for him. Others feared he might try to escape and bring danger back to the town. Red Creek had its share of worries, and an injured Apache warrior was not something anyone knew how to handle. That was when the most unlikely person arrived at the clinic late, one dusty afternoon. Her name was Dawn Willow, a wandering nurse who traveled from settlement to settlement, carrying nothing but her bag, her courage, and a quiet spirit shaped by loss. She had treated miners, farmers, ranch wives, and runaway boys. But she had never been asked to heal a warrior known for his strength and unbreakable will. When she stepped into the room where Iron Canyon lay, she paused, not because she feared him, but because his presence filled the space. It's like a storm waiting to break. The flickering lamp cast shadows over the warrior's carved features, and she saw how tightly he held his jaw, refusing to show weakness. His long black hair had come loose around his shoulders, and though he was clearly in pain, he sat upright, refusing the bed that would have made things easier. Dawn Willow noticed how the other nurses stood outside the door, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and relief. They didn't think she would last longer than they did, but she didn't step back. She closed the door behind her and walked toward him with calm footsteps. Iron Canyon's eyes opened slowly, dark and sharp like a blade in moonlight. For a moment, he simply studied her. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She only looked at him with steady resolve, and that alone was different from anyone else who had entered the room. The silence stretched between them. She felt the weight of it, but she stood firm. When she lifted her hand slightly, offering help but not forcing it, the warrior's expression tightened. He had never trusted strangers. He had never trusted townsfolk, and he certainly had no reason to trust a wandering nurse. But the pain in his side was deep, and his breathing had become uneven. Dawn Willow spoke softly, telling him that she wasn't there to control him or to question his pride. She only wanted to stop the bleeding and ease the pain that was slowly draining the strength he fought so hard to hold on to. For a long moment, Iron Canyon said nothing. Then, with a small nod, he moved his arm away from the wound, giving her silent permission to help him. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to change the air in the room. She came closer, her hands steady as she inspected the wound. She noticed the depth of it, the dried blood along his skin, and the grit from the riverbank. It would take time, patience, and trust to treat him well, the townsfolk whispered outside, wondering if this unexpected nurse could truly handle the warrior who intimidated even the bravest. Some said she was foolish for trying. Others said she didn't know what she was getting into. But a few felt something shift. They wondered whether this wandering woman with quiet strength could do what no other had done. As Dawn Willow worked, she felt the tension in Iron Canyon's muscles stiffen each time she pressed near the wound. He didn't cry out or ask her to stop. Fearless men had broken under less pain, but he kept steady, breathing slowly through each moment. While she cleaned the injury, she spoke to him in a calm voice, not asking questions, but offering simple words designed to ease the heaviness in his mind. She told him that she understood pain, that she understood the burden of surviving when the world kept trying to break a person. Those words caught the warrior's attention. He lifted his gaze and studied her again. Seeing something he didn't expect, she finished dressing the wound, but the work was far from over. He would need days of care, maybe weeks. His strength was remarkable, but no one healed quickly from an injury like that. Don Willow stepped back for a moment, watching the rise and fall of his breath. Iron Canyon's eyes closed, not from weakness, but from a rare moment of relief. For the first time since his injury, someone had reached him without fear or judgment. As she prepared new bandages and placed her tools back into her small wooden case, she didn't see the door open behind her. The sheriff stepped inside, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He had been waiting for a chance to speak to the warrior, but seeing him in a weakened state made him pause. Don Willow turned, sensing trouble. The sheriff narrowed his eyes at the wounded Apache warrior, as if trying to piece together what his presence might bring to the town. He didn't want danger creeping back into Red Creek. He didn't trust anyone from the mountains or the desert, and he didn't believe Iron Canyon had come here by accident. The warrior opened his eyes and saw the sheriff standing there. The room filled with tension once again. Don Willow felt the air tighten around them. She stood between them without thinking, as if drawn there by instinct. The sheriff raised a brow, surprised by her boldness. Iron Canyon shifted slightly, a warning in his eyes. Don Willow could feel the weight of something hidden, something unsaid, something waiting to rise between the sheriff and the wounded warrior. Something connected to the fight that left Iron Canyon wounded near the river. She sensed that this was only the beginning, that the truth behind Iron Canyon's arrival carried danger far greater than the wound across his side. And as the sheriff took another step, the warrior's hand moved to protect himself, proving one thing. Red Creek was on the edge of a storm, and Don Willow had just stepped into the heart of it. Don Willow kept her place between the sheriff and the warrior, feeling the tension rise like heat from desert stones. Iron Canyon did not move much, but even the smallest shift of his shoulders made the air grow heavier. The sheriff seemed ready to question him, yet reluctant to push too far when the nurse stood there, calm but firm. Dawn could sense something deeper in Iron Canyon's eyes, something that warned her this conflict reached far beyond an injury. The sheriff muttered that he only wanted answers, nothing more. Dawn gently reminded him that a man in pain cannot defend himself from accusations. After a pause, the sheriff stepped back, saying he would return once the warrior regained strength. When the door closed behind him, Dawn finally let out the breath she had been holding, but Iron Canyon stayed silent, his gaze still fixed on the door as if expecting trouble to walk right back in. She turned back to him and shifted the lantern, letting the warm glow fall across the edges of his bandage. There was something in the way he watched everything, even while injured, that made her understand he had lived too long in danger to ever be fully at ease. She asked if he needed water, and he gave a slight nod. As she held the canteen to his lips, she noticed the deep marks on his palms. Old scars from battles he must have survived long before reaching Red Creek. Dawn knew many frontier men carried scars like tails carved into their skin. But Iron Canyons were different. They hinted at years of hardship, perhaps even betrayal. When he had finished drinking, she stepped back and studied his posture. Most wounded men would have surrendered to exhaustion, but he sat upright, refusing to show weakness. She wondered who he had been before this fight by the river. She wondered what had driven him away from his people. She wondered what kind of battle left him nearly unconscious, yet still determined to walk. There had to be more to his story than a simple clash over grazing land. The sheriff's suspicion only added to the mystery. The next morning, the sun filtered through the windows of the old mission, warming the wooden floor and the walls that still carried memories of prayers spoken long ago. Dawn returned early, knowing Iron Canyon would not allow just anyone near him. When she entered the room, she saw he had not slept long. His eyes opened the moment she stepped inside. She understood that kind of rest, the kind that came only in short, guarded breaths. She checked his bandage, surprised by how well his wound was beginning to close even after one night. His body healed faster than she expected, a sign of his grit and powerful spirit. Still, he was far from recovered. Dawn asked if the pain was lessening. He answered with a low voice, saying it would take time. It was the first full sentence she heard from him. His tone held strength even in weakness. She sensed that he did not speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight. She wanted to ask more, to understand him, but she knew better than to push. A wounded warrior trusted no one until time proved their intentions. She offered food and told him she would stay nearby if he needed anything. For the first time, she saw a hint of gratitude in his eyes. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, quiet and sincere. While she prepared the food, she could hear voices outside. The town was buzzing with news of the Apache warrior being treated inside the mission. Some folks feared trouble would follow. Others believed he might help them understand the strange events that had been happening near the river long before the fight that left him injured. Farmers had been reporting stolen horses, missing cattle, and riders seen at night. No one knew whether these troublemakers were outsiders, rival groups, or something else entirely. But the sheriff believed Iron Canyon had answers, and that belief made him watchful, restless, and ready to return the moment the nurse stepped away. When Dawn brought the food to Iron Canyon, she found him looking toward the window where dust swirled in golden light. She sat nearby and waited for him to speak if he chose to. After a long moment, he asked why she was helping him when so many feared him. Dawn explained that she had seen fear in people's eyes before, and she knew it often came from stories, not truth. She told him she treated every wounded soul the same, no matter their past. Iron Canyon studied her again as if trying to see whether she spoke from duty or genuine belief. He finally said that her spirit was steady like mountain roots. She felt a strange warmth at his words. It was a rare compliment coming from a man who trusted almost no one. Later that day, the sheriff returned as expected. Dawn tried to keep the room peaceful, but the sheriff's tone was sharp, filled with questions about the river fight. Iron Canyon remained calm, though his jaw tightened. He said he had been ambushed near the river by a group he did not know, men who carried no tribal marks and spoke little. They attacked without reason. He fought back, but the numbers overwhelmed him. The sheriff asked how he escaped. Iron Canyon answered that he made it to the riverbank before collapsing. The sheriff narrowed his eyes, suspicious of every detail. Dawn stepped in again, reminding the sheriff that the warrior needed rest, not interrogation. Reluctantly, the sheriff left, but Dawn could tell he was not satisfied. He believed Iron Canyon knew more than he shared. As the sun sank lower, Dawn noticed the tiredness in Iron Canyon's gaze. She asked if he trusted the sheriff's intentions. Iron Canyon shook his head. He said the sheriff looked at him the same way the men who attacked him did, as if he were in the way of something bigger. Dawn pressed gently, asking what he meant. He said he believed the fight at the river wasn't just about grazing land or some random ambush. Someone was stirring trouble between settlers and native groups, hoping to ignite fear and distrust. Someone who benefited from chaos. That idea unsettled Dawn. Red Creek had always been fragile, barely holding peace as settlers pushed further into Apache land. If someone wanted to break that thin balance, Iron Canyon's presence could be the spark that set off a larger fire. She knew she needed to learn more about his past to understand why he was targeted. But Iron Canyon closed his eyes, signaling he had shared as much as he would for now, as night approached. Dawn stepped outside to gather fresh water from the well. The air had grown cooler, carrying the scent of pine from the distant hills. She filled her tin bucket, her thoughts restless with everything the warrior had revealed. When she turned back toward the mission, she noticed a rider stopping near the edge of town, watching the building with a heavy stillness. The figure stayed mounted, unmoving, as if waiting for something or someone. Dawn felt a chill crawl up her arms. The stranger did not look like a traveler. He looked like a scout waiting for a signal. When she returned inside, Iron Canyon lifted his head slightly, sensing the shift in her mood. She hesitated before telling him what she had seen. His expression darkened. He asked if the rider wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Dawn nodded. Iron Canyon said that rider had been at the river before the attack, and he wasn't there by accident. The uncertainty grew heavier. Dawn began to realize the wound she was treating was only the first layer of a larger threat. Whatever followed Iron Canyon to Red Creek was not finished. The sheriff was suspicious. The townsfolk were nervous. And now, a stranger had arrived, possibly connected to the attack. Iron Canyon tried to sit upright, but the tension tore through his side, making him wince. Dawn rushed to steady him, reminding him that healing takes time. But he shook his head. He said he could not remain helpless while danger moved closer. Dawn insisted that if he tried to stand too soon, he would reopen the wound. He stared at her, torn between duty and survival. Finally, he let his strength ease back onto the bed. Dawn stayed until his breathing grew steady again. The lantern light reflected across the room, flickering against the old adobe walls. Outside, the night deepened, and the sound of horses drifted faintly through the air. Iron Canyon closed his eyes, but not from sleep. He was listening. Dawn realized he was preparing himself, even in weakness, for whatever threat might step into Red Creek. She took a seat near the edge of his bed, keeping watch as the shadows shifted across the floor. She knew this night was only the beginning, and danger was closer than anyone understood. The stranger at the edge of town was not waiting for morning. He was waiting for the right moment to strike. Dawn. Willow stayed near Iron Canyon through most of the night. Even as her eyes grew heavy and the lantern flame wavered, the air outside the mission shifted with every breeze, carrying the distant sounds of restless horses and muted voices. Red Creek was no longer a quiet frontier town. Something unseen pressed against it from the shadows, and Dawn felt it in her bones as clearly as she felt the wooden floor beneath her boots. Iron Canyon sensed it too. Even when he rested, his breathing never dropped into a peaceful rhythm. His body was still, but his mind watched every movement outside the walls. Near Dawn, a soft knock on the door startled her awake. Her hand instinctively reached toward her bag, though she had nothing inside that could protect them if danger walked through. The door creaked open, and Alder Ridge stepped in, rubbing the wariness from his eyes. He had heard the talk around town about the mysterious rider and wanted to make sure Dawn was safe. She told him everything she saw. Alder Ridge frowned, saying the stranger had been spotted near the mercantile as well. The old doctor feared the town was being watched more closely than anyone realized. Iron Canyon listened quietly as Dawn spoke. When she finished, he asked if the stranger carried a rifle strapped to his saddle. Alder Ridge confirmed it. Iron Canyon said the man was connected to those who attacked him by the river. Dawn felt her stomach tighten. She asked what motivated the ambush. Iron Canyon didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window as if trying to see through the rising morning light. He finally spoke, saying there were men eager to profit from the land between the hills and Red Creek. Men who wanted control through fear rather than peace. Some of these men wore the clothes of settlers. Others hid behind hired guns. And all of them wanted the Apache out of the way. Dawn realized this conflict was not only about grazing land, it was about power, influence, and the opportunity to claim the frontier for those who saw its value only in what could be taken. Iron Canyon said the rider was one of these hired men. Dawn asked how he knew. Iron Canyon pressed a hand against his side, steadying himself as he explained that he had seen the stranger meeting with others near the river long before the ambush. They had maps, rifles, a plan to stir trouble so the sheriff would blame the Apache for every missing horse and every stolen piece of land. Dawn felt anger rise in her chest. The people of Red Creek deserved peace, not manipulation. But peace came easy only when the truth was clear. The truth here was muddied by hidden deals and silent threats. Later that morning, Dawn stepped outside to fetch water again. The sun was climbing over the rooftops, casting long shadows along the dusty road. The townsfolk moved about with tension in their steps, aware of whispers but unsure what to believe. Dawn greeted a few as she walked, but the worry in their faces reminded her how fragile calm could be in a place like this. When she reached the well, she noticed two ranch hands talking in low voices. They said someone had cut the fence near the north pasture during the night. Cattle had wandered off, leaving tracks that led toward the foothills. One of them claimed to see hoof prints from a heavier horse, the kind used by hired riders, not local farmers. Dawn knew Iron Canyon was right. Someone was planting trouble everywhere. She returned to the mission and told him what she heard. Iron Canyon tried to rise, but the wound forced him back down. Dawn knelt beside him, reminding him that he would be no help to anyone if he reopened the injury. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then admitted he was torn between healing and protecting the land that mattered to him. Dawn found herself wanting to ease that burden, though she knew she couldn't fight his battles for him as the day moved on. The sheriff returned more agitated than before. He questioned Dawn first, asking if she had noticed anything strange during the night. She hesitated, unsure if involving the sheriff would help or make things worse. She finally admitted seeing the rider. The sheriff cursed under his breath, saying horses had been stolen from the South Ranch as well. He suspected an organized group behind it. When he turned toward Iron Canyon, Dawn moved slightly, placing herself in a protective stance without meaning to. The sheriff saw the gesture, but ignored it. He demanded to know whether Iron Canyon recognized the rider. Iron Canyon answered with caution. He said he had seen the man before but did not know his name. The sheriff pressed harder, doubting every word. Dawn sensed the sheriff was under pressure from the townsfolk to restore order, and he was growing desperate. He warned Iron Canyon that if anything threatened Red Creek, he would act without hesitation. Iron Canyon held his gaze unafraid. Dawn felt the weight of their unspoken challenge hanging between them like a drawn rope ready to snap after the sheriff left. Dawn saw frustration in Iron Canyon's eyes. She asked if he believed the sheriff was part of the scheme. Iron Canyon shook his head. He said the sheriff was a man trying to keep his town safe, but blinded by distrust. The real enemy was outside the town, working quietly while Red Creek argued among itself. Dawn realized the sheriff's distrust could push him to make dangerous decisions, especially if the attacks continued. The enemies in the shadows were counting on that. Later that afternoon, a young stable boy named Flint came running to the mission. He said a wagon had been found overturned on the old trail, its supplies taken, and the driver missing. Dawn felt her heart sink. Iron Canyon's jaw tightened. Flint described tracks around the wagon, boot marks from several men. One print matched the shape of the stranger's heavy riding boots. Dawn asked Flint if he could keep this information quiet for now. Flint nodded, understanding the danger of spreading fear too quickly. Dawn returned inside and told Iron Canyon everything. He said the attacks were growing bolder and happening too fast to be random. Dawn asked if the missing driver might still be alive. Iron Canyon said he believed so, because the hired riders needed hostages to frame the Apache or to bargain for land later. Dawn felt the conflict growing heavier, not just around them, but inside her. She had never expected to be caught in the middle of a struggle between ranchers, hired guns, and a wounded warrior trying to protect his people. But she could not turn away now. As evening approached, Alderidge brought more herbs for pain and helped Dawn prepare a stronger mixture for Iron Canyon. The older doctor confessed he was worried. He said he had heard riders near his cabin the night before. He suspected they were scouting the area. Dawn asked if he thought they were watching the mission as well. Alderidge nodded grimly. He urged Dawn to stay alert. Iron Canyon watched them both, sensing fear in the air. He said fear was exactly what their enemies wanted. Fear made good men act too soon, and bad men act without resistance. Dawn asked if he knew who was leading these hired riders. Iron Canyon paused for a long moment. Then he said he had seen a man among the group at the river, someone who carried himself with authority. A man dressed well, not like the others. A man who didn't belong to any ranch or settlement. Someone who looked like he had come from a powerful family, maybe even from the city far beyond the frontier. A man driven by greed. Dawn felt a cold shiver when Iron Canyon described him. She sensed that man's decisions reached into Red Creek even now. She asked if the warrior believed this man was planning something bigger. Iron Canyon said yes. He believed the attacks were only the beginning, meant to weaken trust and make the people of Red Creek feel cornered. Once fear took hold, someone could step in with promises of safety, guiding the town into a trap they wouldn't see until it was too late. The lantern flickered as the night deepened again, casting long shadows across the mission walls. Dawn stood at the window watching the dark horizon. Iron Canyon lay in silence, listening to the sounds outside. The tension was rising, pressing in from all sides. And she knew they were running out of time before something larger struck. A sudden creak outside made Dawn tense. Iron Canyon lifted his head, alert despite the pain. Someone was moving near the mission door, slow and deliberate. Dawn's heartbeat quickened as she reached for the lantern, unsure whether to call out or stay silent. The footsteps drew closer. The door handle shifted. Someone was trying to enter the mission without knocking. Dawn Willow froze as the handle turned. Her breath locked in her chest. The old mission door creaked just enough to whisper danger into the room. Iron Canyon shifted, forcing himself upright despite the pain burning through his side. His eyes sharpened like the edge of a knife, fixed on the door as if he could see through the wood. Dawn reached for the lantern, not as a weapon, but as something to steady her trembling hands. The air felt thick. Stretched tight with the weight of whatever stood outside, a shadow slipped across the crack under the door. Iron Canyon raised a hand, signaling Dawn to stay silent. She swallowed and backed up, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the intruder would hear it. The door inched open, and a figure stepped inside without a word. The lantern light flickered across his face, revealing Flint, the stable boy. His cheeks were pale, eyes wide with fear. Dawn exhaled in relief. But the relief vanished the moment she saw the tremble in his hands. Flint whispered that he had run all the way from the outskirts of town. He said riders had gathered near the northern ridge, at least 6 of them, all armed. They weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing for something. He said he overheard them talking about moving closer to Red Creek by nightfall. Dawn glanced at Iron Canyon, whose expression hardened. This was the moment they feared. Their enemies were done creeping in the shadows. Iron Canyon asked if the rider with the long coat was among them. Flint nodded. Dawn felt the tension in the room spike. That rider had been watching them, waiting. Now he wasn't waiting anymore. Flint said he thought the men were planning to strike several ranches at once, causing chaos that would be blamed on the Apache. Dawn's pulse quickened. If the town believed that, they'd turn against Iron Canyon's people, and even against him. Whether he was wounded or not, the warrior tried again to rise, but the movement sent a sharp wave of pain through him. Dawn caught his arm, pleading with him to stay down. But Iron Canyon said he could not lie in bed while men rode to destroy innocent homes. Dawn understood his desperation, yet she could not let him tear open a wound that might take his life. Her voice softened as she reminded him he was still healing. He clenched his jaw, torn between his body's limits and the duty swelling in his chest. Flint insisted that the sheriff had already been warned. But the sheriff was gathering a small group of townsfolk and preparing to ride toward the ridge. Dawn felt dread creep through her. The sheriff didn't know the full truth. He didn't know he was walking into a trap set to make him believe the worst. She told Flint to stay inside the mission for safety. Flint hesitated but obeyed, hiding near the back room. Iron Canyon asked Dawn for the truth she had been avoiding. He wanted to know if the sheriff would act with reason or anger when faced with trouble. Dawn looked toward the door where the sheriff had stood days before, accusing the warrior without understanding. She finally admitted that the sheriff wanted peace but feared the Apache more than he feared the hired men. That meant he could be convinced easily. Iron Canyon closed his eyes, letting the weight of her answer sink in. He said the man in the long coat was counting on that fear. Dawn realized that every step the sheriff took toward the ridge pushed the town closer to disaster. Outside, the sky darkened as clouds gathered, heavy with the promise of a storm. Dawn lit another lantern, trying to push back the gloom settling over the mission. Iron Canyon's breathing grew uneven as he fought against the pain to stay alert. Dawn prepared fresh bandages and herbs, hoping to ease the strain so he could think clearly. She knew they didn't have the luxury of time. If the sheriff confronted the hired men without knowing who truly orchestrated the violence, the entire town could be thrown into conflict. As she worked, Iron Canyon told her there was something she needed to understand. Days before the ambush, he had discovered a hidden camp near the river. Inside were crates of supplies with markings from a large trading company tied to a wealthy land baron from the capital. This baron had sent men west in the past, trying to gain control of fertile land using any means necessary. The warrior believed the man in the long coat worked for this baron, stirring trouble to weaken any claim the Apache had to the land. Once fear took over, once settlers believed the Apache were responsible for the attacks, the baron could petition to bring in soldiers or private guards. With them here, he could seize control of the valley, where both Apache and settlers lived. Dawn felt cold run through her. She knew powerful men could be ruthless, but this went beyond greed. This was manipulation designed to make neighbors turn on each other. She realized the story Iron Canyon carried was far larger than she imagined, and now, the sheriff, the townsfolk, the ranches, even the wandering nurse in the mission were trapped in the middle. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the first drops of rain tapped against the window. Dawn asked Iron Canyon what they could do. He looked at her with steady resolve and said they needed to warn the sheriff before he reached the ridge. Dawn knew he was right, but Iron Canyon could barely stand, let alone ride. She argued that she could deliver the warning herself. Iron Canyon shook his head. He said the sheriff would not believe a nurse who had sided with an Apache. Dawn bristled at his words, but she knew he wasn't wrong. Trust was thin in Red Creek. Iron Canyon said he must go. Dawn refused, insisting it would tear open his wound. He told her that if he didn't go, the land would fall into the hands of a man who used hatred as his weapon. Dawn felt torn between protecting the warrior's life and protecting the lives of everyone outside the mission. Iron Canyon pushed himself up again, gripping the edge of the bed to keep from collapsing. She reached for him, urging him to stop, but he steadied himself with surprising determination. Flint came forward quietly. He suggested a different way, said he knew a horse gentle enough to carry Iron Canyon without jolting his wound too much. Dawn shook her head, insisting Iron Canyon was still too weak. Iron Canyon asked if Flint could ready the horse without anyone seeing. Flint nodded and slipped outside to make preparations. As the rain grew heavier, Dawn helped Iron Canyon to his feet, supporting his weight with her small frame. He leaned on her with gratitude in his eyes, though he said nothing. Every step he took left her afraid the pain would be too much, yet he kept moving. When they reached the back door, Flint appeared, leading a sturdy bay horse with calm eyes. Dawn helped Iron Canyon mount, her hands shaking as the tension built inside her. The storm whipped around them, the wind carrying the scent of lightning and dust. Iron Canyon gripped the reins, wincing as the movement tugged at his injury. He leaned toward Dawn, telling her that if he did not return, she must protect the truth. She felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him he would return, that everything would end peacefully. But the storm around them refused to make such promises. Iron Canyon urged the horse into motion, riding out into the storm toward the ridge where the sheriff and the hired men would soon meet. Dawn watched the figure of the wounded warrior merge with the night, her heart pulling in two directions at once. Rain fell harder now, striking the ground with force, echoing the rising tension in her chest. She knew danger surrounded Iron Canyon on every side. She knew the hired men would not hesitate to finish what they started. And she knew the sheriff might take one look at Iron Canyon and believe he was the threat. Dawn stood in the storm watching the fading silhouette, knowing the next moments would decide whether the land found peace or fell into ruin. And Iron Canyon, wounded but unbroken, was riding straight into the heart of the danger waiting for him. The storm deepened as Iron Canyon rode toward the ridge, each crack of thunder shaking the sky above him. Dawn Willow watched from the mission doorway, her clothes soaked through, her heart tightening with every step his horse carried him farther into danger. She wanted to run after him, to keep him from facing the armed riders, who plotted against both his people and the settlers of Red Creek. But she knew this was a moment he had prepared. His spirit for long before he ever reached the mission. Even wounded, he rode like a man who carried the weight of an entire valley on his shoulders. Iron Canyon pressed on despite the pain burning along his side. Rain streaked down his face, mixing with the sweat of struggle, but he stayed focused. On the distant glow of torches flickering through the trees, he could hear voices, angry and restless, echoing across the ridge. He slowed his horse, sliding carefully to the ground as lightning flashed behind him. He pressed a hand to the wound, willing his legs to stay strong, and moved toward the voices. Down below, the sheriff and 5 townsfolk hid behind large rocks, watching the riders who had gathered in a tight circle. The sheriff whispered to his men that something wasn't right. The riders didn't look like raiders. They looked organized, coordinated, waiting for a signal. The sheriff felt the tension in the air, and for the first time questioned his earlier assumptions. Then the man in the long coat stepped forward, speaking loudly so the sheriff's group could hear. He announced that the Apache were to blame for the missing horses and stolen supplies, and that their actions were proof they deserved to be driven off the land. He spoke with confidence, trying to ignite anger. But the sheriff noticed something. The man's words did not match the calm he displayed. It felt rehearsed. Forced, before the sheriff could make sense of it, Iron Canyon stepped from the shadows. Rain dripping down his arms, every part of him trembling with pain, yet standing tall. The townsfolk gasped at the sight of him. The sheriff reached for his rifle but hesitated when Iron Canyon didn't raise his hands or show any threat. The wounded warrior called out to the riders, demanding the truth. His voice carried across the ridge with steady force. The man in the long coat stiffened, recognizing him instantly. He tried to turn the situation in his favor, saying the Apache warrior had attacked settlers and now came to finish what he started. But Iron Canyon stepped closer, exposing the lies. He told everyone about the hidden camp by the river, the crates marked with the Baron's trading stamp, and the men hired to create fear. He told them these riders were paid to stir chaos so powerful men could take the valley for themselves. One of the sheriff's men muttered that they had heard rumors of outsiders wanting the land. Another said he had seen crates with the same markings near his ranch. Doubt began spreading among the townsfolk, weakening the influence of the man in the long coat. The stranger realized the tide was shifting and drew his pistol, aiming it at Iron Canyon. Dawn Willow, who had followed at a distance despite her fear, saw the glint of steel and cried out. The sheriff spun toward her voice and saw the stranger raise the weapon. Instinct overtook him. He fired a warning shot into the air and ordered everyone to lower their guns. But the stranger ignored the command and pulled the trigger. Iron Canyon moved. Pushing himself with every ounce of remaining strength, he dodged. The bullet enough that it grazed his shoulder instead of piercing his chest. The injury staggered him, but he stayed on his feet. The sheriff lunged forward, tackling the stranger before he could fire again. The other townsfolk rushed in to help, wrestling the riders to the ground. The storm roared as chaos broke loose, but this time it was the chaos of justice, finally breaking through deception. When the riders were bound and the stranger disarmed, the sheriff turned to Iron Canyon. The warrior struggled to keep standing, the pain almost too much, but he refused to fall. Dawn pushed her way through the group, reaching his side just as his legs gave out. She caught him, holding him steady as he sank to one knee. Her hands trembled, but her voice stayed strong as she told him she was there. Iron Canyon looked at her, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but fear he had failed the ones he tried to protect. The sheriff knelt beside them. Rain ran down his face, mixing with the guilt in his eyes. He apologized to the warrior, admitting he let fear cloud his judgment. He said he didn't want to lose the land to greedy men any more than the Apache did. Iron Canyon nodded weakly, accepting his words with grace. Dawn pressed cloth against his bleeding shoulder and urged the sheriff to help her get him back to the mission. By morning, the storm had passed. Light streamed through the windows of the mission, casting soft gold across the room where Iron Canyon lay recovering. Dawn Willow stayed near him, changing his bandages and offering small sips of water. Alder Ridge joined her, shaking his head in awe at the warrior's will to survive. Dawn watched Iron Canyon breathe more steadily, each rise of his chest, telling her he was fighting his way back to strength. Outside, Red Creek had changed overnight. The sheriff had gathered the townsfolk and explained the truth behind the attacks. The riders were being taken to a larger settlement for questioning, and the man in the long coat was confirmed to be an agent of the land baron from the capital. With his plot exposed, the threat to the valley dissolved. The settlers realized the Apache had never been their enemies. The fear that once divided them gave way to understanding. Days passed as Iron Canyon healed. Dawn spent each day watching over him, and each night she found her thoughts drifting to the future. She had never expected her path to cross with a warrior carrying the weight of an entire people. She never thought she would become part of a battle bigger than any she had known. But now, she couldn't imagine a life without the strength she found standing beside him. When Iron Canyon was finally strong enough to walk outside, Don supported him as they stepped into the sunlight. The air was warm, the land quiet, in a peaceful way that felt new. Several townsfolk approached, offering their thanks and respect. Iron Canyon accepted each gesture with humility, though he remained quiet. The sheriff approached with an offer for future peace talks between the settlers and the Apache, wanting to build trust instead of fear. Iron Canyon looked at Dawn, letting her see the gratitude he did not speak aloud. She knew he would return to his people soon, but she also knew he would not forget what they had faced together. He told her that she had done what no one else could. She had treated him not as an enemy or legend, but as a human being. She had shown courage without seeking recognition, and that courage had saved more lives than anyone realized. Dawn felt warmth spread across her chest. She told him he had done the same for her. He had shown her that even in the harshest places, honor still walked the land, and strength could come from standing up for truth, even when the world resisted it. As the sun dipped lower, Iron Canyon promised he would return after meeting with his people. Dawn nodded, believing him. She watched him ride away, no longer wounded, no longer chased by shadows. The land stretched ahead of him, wide and open, carrying the promise of a future shaped by peace instead of fear. Dawn stood in the quiet mission yard, her heart full. The valley had been saved. The lies had been exposed. And the unlikely nurse, who once walked alone, now carried the story of a warrior who changed her life forever. It was a story of courage, healing, and unity. A story where trust overcame fear, where truth defeated greed, and where two souls from different worlds found strength in each other's presence. And in the end, the frontier carried their names not as legend but as hope.